What we really need is a super PAC that focuses all of its efforts on advertising for candidates who would vote against foreign influence in U.S. politics and foreign funding, from the United States to a very specific country. And a lot of people say there are no political solutions, or solutions can only be found at the local politics level, and that's well and good, and there's a lot of truth to that, but obviously politics still affects our everyday life. Obviously court cases are still lost and won every day, and the country is declining at a certain rate, and maybe certain areas are improving at a certain rate. But anyways, the point being, I don't think that people should ignore politics altogether, and I think that we could actually make a significant difference by doing something like that. So the first thing to consider, it would basically be like an anti-APAC. And the one thing that I hear, we're processing tons and tons of applications from hundreds and hundreds of people around the country applying to join Return to the Land, the private membership association. And a lot of those people have very recently become aware of this sort of demographic war that's being waged against us, so to speak. But one thing I very commonly hear when we ask them about politics is they always mention APAC, not always, but a lot of times they mention APAC and Israel. Those people who don't even go any deeper into the subject, on the surface level, one of the main things they mention, APAC and Israel's influence in U.S. politics. And it goes, so there's the influence that it has in Congress. And I'm not even talking about the illicit influence in terms of blackmailing the higher-ups. I'm just talking about lobbying, right? Lobbying and money, campaign funding, basically buying the majority of the United States Congress. That kind of influence, which then results in billions of dollars going every year to Israel. And that's not just the $4 billion that's touted as the amount that we spend each year, because there's a whole bunch of additional things. There's weapons deals they don't always have to pay for. There's a bunch of loans on top of that are technically loans, but there's never any expectation that they're going to pay them back. So the actual amount they receive each year is a lot higher than $4 billion. I don't know how much, but everyone noticed, and this was pretty embarrassing for President Trump. Everyone noticed that when he was cutting off foreign aid to all these countries earlier in the year and making all these headlines about it, and most sane people are responding, well, why are we propping up the economies and giving out handouts to millions of people in other countries when our own people need to be taken care of first? And everyone noticed that he did that to a whole bunch of countries except Israel. It was not mentioned at all. And that's a big issue. So everybody knows that APAC is a problem, and that there's a lot of incredible amounts of influence. You can see this even things that happened decades ago, like the USS, a certain ship that I won't name because I have a feeling algorithm go brrr, if you start talking about things like that. But anyways, so what is a super PAC? A lot of people have heard about them a long time ago when they first started to be a thing, but essentially a political action committee can only donate a limited amount of money to a candidate, and there are a lot of limits. It's very restricted. The idea is PACs were restricted so that it wasn't super easy to buy an election from somebody with lots of money. But of course, they just made a way around that. All you have to do is fill out a few extra forms and call your organization something different. And now super PACs, as far as I know, they can't actually donate any money to a candidate, nor can they coordinate with candidates. All they can do is spend unlimited money and take in unlimited donations on advertising on behalf of candidates or whatever political causes they want, which is really interesting. And effectively gets around these campaign donation limits, and it makes it very easy for people with lots of money to buy elections. And so I'm wondering why haven't we used this amazing tool available to us? People maybe just have a lot of disdain for the political system and they don't want to get into it. There's also the type of education that you need to start and run something like that. You need a whole crew of people who are very educated. And as we know, higher education has resulted in brainwashing almost everyone that goes through it to be extremely liberal. And so much though that liberals have this mistaken belief that conservatives are uneducated and the result of education is being liberal. But that's not really true. The result of an extremely liberal education is a lot of people that go through it are going to end up being far left extremists in their views. But that doesn't mean that liberalism itself, it's obviously very uneducated and mentally ill perspective on the world. So there's various reasons why we haven't pursued those types of routes in helping to change the country and improve our nation. So when I've mentioned this to people that know me, talked about it in person, because it's, this crazy idea I have, the first thing they say is, that's ridiculous, that's futile, you cannot outspend APAC. It's impossible. They literally print the money, they control, people who are related to them control the central banks and print the money, so there's no way you could possibly outspend them. I say that that's complete hogwash, because we're not trying to outspend APAC in any way. We're not going to need to achieve anywhere near the level of funding that they have. Obviously such an organization would need quite a large budget, but there's two things to consider. First of all, you don't need to buy Congress and the House of Representatives and outspend APAC to make a difference. You need to spend 2% of APAC's budget, whatever that is. You need to get to the point where you gain a few seats and get to the point where you're actually making waves, and then they start to capitulate. They start to capitulate because they'll realize, well, they're actually making waves, and they'll start to get scared, and maybe they have to now kowtow a little bit, like in that famous Goebbels quote where he talks about all of a sudden the journalists and the news will pretend that pretend that they're on your side, but tell them please don't go to any great expense, right? The joke is that, well, we know what you're doing, we don't care. So you don't have to outspend APAC. You just have to spend a little bit, just enough to start making a dent, and that's going to set things in motion, right? You don't win these types of wars that are going on thousands of years, or should I just say conflicts, these sort of conflicts that are going on for thousands of years over long periods of time. You don't win it by some big fantastical revolution that everyone is dreaming about, right? You win it by just making calculated moves here and there. You have a strategy, and you don't engage in defeatism. Just because you can't outspend APAC doesn't mean you don't start a super PAC that's going to make a big dent, a small dent in the political sphere, but enough to kind of send people scurrying through the tunnels. So the other thing to consider is, I have no idea how much money APAC spends. I don't know if it's in the millions, the tens of millions, the billions. I have no idea. I have no idea. But let's just say, for the sake of example, if APAC, let's say if they spend $100 million a year, let's just throw a random number out there, right? A lot of that is waste, because those types of organizations, they're entitled, they're entrenched. The people that work there are a lot of them are making six-figure salaries, probably all of them, except for the janitors, six-figure salaries with benefits, and they get tons of money from all kinds of various interesting sources, including probably the US government itself, somehow through USAID or something. Anyways, so they waste a lot of money. So they're going to have a lot of people living in cities like DC where the rent is super, super high. They're renting commercial office space. They're doing a lot of stuff, spending a lot of money. They're buying US Congress. And so they don't have the mentality of a bootstrapping startup organization that needs to spend every penny as well as it can, okay? They have the mentality of the spoiled rich kid who's getting money from a trust fund, so he spends all his time doing illegal drugs and paying for prostitutes rather than doing what his parents did with their life, which obviously was to work hard and make money. That's why there tends to be this issue with children of wealthy parents. There's some trick to it, obviously, because some children of wealthy parents turn out very well and some turn out addicts and atrocious people. So the APAC is basically is going to have the mentality of one of those trust fund kids. And so maybe, let's say they spend random number $100 million a year. They could probably do what they were doing with $50 million a year or $70 million a year, but because they're probably not very good at spending money, they're probably being quite lavish. There's probably a lot of embezzlement and fraud going on. I think that's a safe assumption to make. So If you spend 2% of their money, what they spend, you're really kind of spending 4 or 5% of their budget effectively. And what if you focused on billboards? Because the obvious thing is, well, you start a website, of course, you start a blog, but a lot of super PACs will take out television ads, will take out Facebook and Google ads, and those entities, oftentimes, if you look at who the CEO is, and a lot of these executive and the owners, who the owners of the equity in the companies are, a lot of it can be traced back to this relatives of the same country that APAC is representing. And so you got to wonder, well, if I'm paying them to air my thing, how am I going to know if it's really getting the reach that I'm paying for? Also, aren't they just going to deny the ad? Because a lot of big media houses will they won't run an ad. So you have that struggle as well. So billboards are physical. It's very old school. They're physically part of your reality. They're there every single time you drive by them. Every single time you see them, they're there. They're owned by there are big companies that own billboards, but there's also private owners or smaller companies. It's probably easier to put in it. I mean, assuming you're not putting up offensive billboards. If you're putting up fairly benign that say things like, okay, imagine a billboard, remove foreign influence from U.S. Congress, and it shows a picture of the face, a headshot of each of the local representatives or the state representatives, and it gives a number. It says like something $6.7 billion to foreign countries. Another candidate, $20.7 billion to other countries, so in big red ink. So everyone that drives by is seeing it. Their favorite rhino Republican, conservative, anti-abortion state representatives, legislators, and federal, their U.S. senators and all that. They're sending billions and billions of dollars to other countries. They didn't even know that. They're Republicans, they're conservatives. I thought they were fiscally conservative, and then they start to think and look into. Anyways, the idea is just to generate negative press and hopefully change a few congressional seats. Not even that many, just a few. So you start to get people like Thomas Massies into Congress. So billboards is just one crazy idea that I had, because I think that's a unique, old school form of marketing that's a little bit easier to get into. Very expensive, but again, it's part of your physical reality. It's a lot harder for them to manipulate how many people see a billboard and then lie to you about it. So that's just one idea. And then also the focus, I think that such an organization should probably completely ignore the U.S. Senate. APAC has spent untold amounts of money and probably clandestine operations involving Mossad to purchase the U.S. Senate. It's probably not even worth touching that. It's very hard for any sort of dissenter to get into the Senate. So it would probably be much easier to focus on the House of Representatives and state legislature, because believe it or not, states do also give some money to that certain foreign country. And they also pass policy, for example, the infamous Israel boycott law, and some states have a law that says in order to be a contractor with a state, you have to sign a document promising to not boycott Israel. And it's weird. Why are we pledging allegiance to a foreign country? So that's something that the state legislators can start to affect. And the Supreme Court actually refuses to touch that case. I don't think the Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court has ruled on it. Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think they've ruled on it. I think they've just refused to touch it, which to me is kind of like not ruling on it and saying that it's legal, but just hands off, because they know probably what's going to happen to them if they start to have to worry about things if they were to overturn that. So that's something we can start calling attention to, even moving into sort of local politics and elections. But the main thing is to focus singly on removing foreign influence from U.S. politics. That's something that everyone can get behind. Even boomers that are still in their phase of loving Israel, they will still generally agree with the idea of removing foreign influence from U.S. politics. And if you start pointing out just how much money Israel is getting, if you start pointing out all the money on top of the $4 billion, if you start pointing out weird influences, dual citizens all over the place in the legislature, if you start pointing out the USS ship that shall not be named, things like that. So at least you're getting people on the road towards that. And in the 10 years it's going to take for boomers to really start to sort of drop off and not become a significant part of the voting bloc anymore, you're going to see, I think you're going to see big changes. So obviously, to start a super PAC, anti-APAC, the APAC, the anti-APAC super PAC, it's a large endeavor, require a lot of very skilled people, and it's not something that I have time to do at all because I'm obviously very busy with what I'm doing right now. So I'm curious if an organizational structure were made showing all the people that are needed, everything from web designers, graphic designers, lawyers, people to do the paperwork. If that were all figured out and you got people to fill those roles, and you set a budget, because such an organization can't be run on a volunteer basis. It needs to have salaried employees that can work full time. This is what we're talking about is a very, very serious thing, right? So if that could be figured out, I think there's enough interest to start something like this. And I think if there were a serious organization that was duly, registered as a political action committee, and I think people would start to pour money into that, because they would say, hey, I know we can't outspend APAC, but we can make a dent in what's happening, and we can start to, turn people's heads. Just like with Return to the Land and all the recent media coverage, it's really turning people's heads and it's getting everywhere. So you can do this one little thing, We don't have these grand visions of making the entire country like this. We just like, hey, let's start an intentional community because we really want this kind of life for ourselves. And if it takes off, great. And if it doesn't, cool. I mean, we're still living the life that we want to live. And even in so doing, and doing that relatively minor thing, just kind of moving out here and buying a piece of land, all of a sudden millions and millions of people across the country, it's coming up in the daily news on normies' smartphones, what we're doing here. And they're misrepresenting it, of course. They're calling us a bunch of like evil, scary racists. They're trying to get people all worried and worked up. The problem is people know that the coverage they're giving it to, the editorial comments in the articles, do not match the actual things that we're saying and the actual actions that we're taking and the official policy of the organization, the official social media of the organization. Do some of us personally say edgy things that are politically offensive on our social media? Of course. That's the modern internet. That's the world we live in. So people are going to have a problem with that. That's okay. The important thing is with a relatively minor action, you can make huge waves across the country if you organize well. And all of the magic in Return to the Land, I mean, there's obviously no such thing as magic, but all of the magic, so to speak, it doesn't just come from the group of people that came together and all the work that we did, but it also comes in the way that we came together. Because you can get together with 27 people, 28 people, 50 people, and spend all day building a stone wall. And you're going to have a really good stone wall. It's going to be an awesome stone wall, possibly one of the best stone walls that have been built. But it's not going to make national news ever. It's going to make, you should still do it. You should still do it. But now, well, what about if you got those people together and you did a bunch of paperwork and signed a bunch of documents, and next thing you know, pro-European heritage advocacy issues are now part of mainstream discussion, mainstream media, less than 2 years after you started. So it's all about the competency that you attract, the skills that you attract, and how to organize that in a way that makes a big difference with a relatively small amount of effort. So that's what we need to do, not just with Return to the Land, but with political action as well. There's organizations that encourage people to get in local politics, but I haven't seen it actually getting people into local politics who are the people that are really the type to speak up about these issues that affect us. So we need not just YouTube talking heads telling guys, oh yeah, go to your town meetings. We need to figure out what better ways to get it to actually happen, to get young guys to actually start going to every single town and county meeting in their area, and people just really starting to get involved. So we need that, and then we also need these political organizations that are on our side, that are helping us, that are occupying the same space as all these evil think tanks in DC that are only doing things to hurt us, that are only doing things to increase weaponized multiculturalism, which, by the way, as I've mentioned in other videos, weaponized multiculturalism, right? It's unfair both for the target culture and the so-called invading culture, right? So if you take a bunch of people from the third world and you bring them to the first world, it's unfair both for the people that were living in the first world country and the people that are coming from the third world. It causes all kinds of problems for both populations. So regardless of if you don't care about white people at all, that's okay. But whatever people you do care about, what's happening hurts them too, in a lot of different ways. I was talking about cultural incompatibility. It's not fair to that Haitian woman who got arrested for eating her neighbor's cat, that viral video that went around, police officer in some town in Ohio, I think, arresting a Haitian immigrant who was very recently brought over for eating her neighbor's cat. And it's not fair to her that she was enticed for economic reasons into coming to a country where she didn't realize that she would get arrested for doing something that was a fairly normal part of her culture. So we need organizations like Return to the Land, getting people together, getting families together so they realize there's hope in the world, getting their children away from the corrupting influences of modern society. We need young people to go to their town and county meetings and get involved in local politics. Even if you're just going and listening at first, eventually you'll get the hang of it and you'll figure out what's happening. And then we also need political organizations, which is another step. We don't need to outspend APAC. We don't need to go crazy, but we do need big organizations that people are happy about, that make a big effort in exposing these politicians who are representing a foreign country in the U.S. And the U.S. legislature and also the state legislature. That's something we can make a difference in. People just need to start. We just need to start turning heads and making the news a little bit. We need a couple more If we had just 2 more Thomas Massies in the House of Representatives. Listen, this Super PAC might even advertise on behalf of the squad because of how anti-Israel they are. Now let's see if they're actually voting against Israel, or if they're just talking about it because of the Palestinians. That's another topic, is how much the Democrats actually want to stop what's happening in Palestine. So are they actually voting against the spending budgets for that are giving military aid to Israel, or are they just LARPing about it so that all the far left Antifas are voting for them because they think that they're against Israel's whatever they're doing in Palestine? So that's an issue. But hey, the only issue that this Super PAC would care about would be foreign influence in U.S. politics. So it wouldn't matter if a politician was extremely liberal or extremely conservative, as long as they're voting against foreign influence in United States politics, against sort of the influence of people who are not of European descent in a country that was founded, in a nation that was founded by Europeans. That's what it would take. So that's probably what we need to do. I can't do it. It needs a lot of people to be done, but I think it's something that can be done as a collaborative effort. And again, as long as it doesn't require long-term volunteer labor, because such an organization does need to have salaried staff working full-time and taking care of all that business. So I don't even know what will happen with this idea, but it would be cool if it actually happened. So we'll definitely be thinking about it in the future. Have a good day, everybody.